Good evening. I am Karen Taylor. I am Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, and I'm so pleased to welcome both our in-person and our online audience to tonight's talk. A museum object from Antiquity, Antiquity Reexamined. For those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York was founded in 1785. That's 239 years ago. And it was founded by the skilled craftsmen of the City of New York. And that's also why I'm particularly pleased that tonight's talk celebrates the artisan. The General Society continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our various educational and cultural programs. These include our lecture series, of which, of course, tonight is part of, originally founded in 1838. It also includes our John M. Mossman Law Museum, which you're welcome our in-person audience to visit after our talk tonight, our tuition-free mechanics and our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, and of course, the General Society Library. And I am going to take a moment for those of you to celebrate the restoration of our wonderful skylight and the wonderful, and thank you. And also our recent installation of these beautiful lights by Aurora Lampworks. I also want to thank them for that too. We host tonight's program in partnership with the Friends of the Archaeological Institute of America, New York Society, who suggested tonight's program. And we want to express our thanks to AIA-NY and who will introduce our thanks to AIA-NY and to introduce our distinguished speakers from the Metropolitan Museum this evening. I am pleased to introduce Heidi James Fisher, a board member of AIA New York Society and the chair of the Friends of AIA New York Society and a member of the Cultural Heritage Committee of the National AIA. Heidi, a very warm welcome.
There's a lot of AIAs in that. Good evening, I'm Heidi James Fisher, Chair of Friends of AIA New York Society. Friends of the AIA New York Society is a membership group that supports the AIA New York Society lecture program. Members also have access to a series of special lectures and events each year. Most importantly, Friends supports the AIA New York Scholarship Program, which grants a local New York student a scholarship to work on an archaeological site. This evening, we have a few students here that are part of our New York Scholars Program. I'm happy to discuss any AIA membership and Friends membership and other ways to support the AIA after the lecture. We are grateful to the General Society Library for co-sponsoring this talk this evening, and especially to Karen Taylor, who is the program director, and Angelo Vigorito, who manages the technology, and I hope I just pronounced his name correctly. We are delighted to introduce the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Dr. Kim Benzel and Jean-François de Lapérouse this evening as they reveal cutting-edge technology and new scholarship about the reattribution of the Met's bronze head of a ruler. Dr. Benzel is a curator in charge of the Department of Ancient Near East Eastern Art at the Met. Dr. Benzel joined the Met in 1990 and has worked on numerous exhibitions and related publications. Dr. Benzel holds a PhD in art history and archaeology from Columbia University, and currently she and her colleagues in the department are working on a full reimagining and renovation of the permanent galleries of the Ancient Near East art at the Met, which we are all excited to see a sneak peek of tonight and look forward to the new galleries opening in 2026. Jean-François de Lapérouse is a conservator of objects conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He has worked primarily with the ancient Near East and Islamic collections since joining the museum staff in in 1989, almost 1889, but he is interested in examining how available materials and technologies have impacted the formation of specific artistic forms and styles. He received a BA in art history from Princeton University and completed the coursework for a doctorate at the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University, where he has also received a certificate in conservation. He has participated as a conservator at archaeological sites in Turkey and Syria. Please join me in welcoming our special speakers this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi, so much. And there's a real joke there. JF and I are of that age where we're constantly the oldest people in meetings right now, so it's perfect. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to the General Society, to the AIA, to Karen, Angelo, Heidi, and all that made this evening possible. So full disclosure, I am JF, Jean-François goes by JF, so that's what that is. Full disclosure, I'm his warm-up act and his closing act. And other than that, it's really all about JF and his research on this one particular antiquity. So what I'm really here to do tonight is, look, it works. It's amazing. I've had very bad technological luck recently, so I'm surprised at myself. What I'm really here to do is explain the context and present the context in which the research on this head, on this sculpture, is being made possible. It's an opportunity because, as Heidi has already mentioned, we are completely renovating our permanent galleries at the Met, the Galleries for Ancient Near Eastern Art. Last time they had a full renovation was the early 80s, refresh in the late 90s. But it is the first time they're really being rethought narratively and completely redesigned. And so, you know, when we were closed, we've been closed for a year now, and that presents an opportunity to work on objects, to send objects on the road. I'll talk about that at the very end. I'll come back for a little bit of that PR work. And, but really what I wanted to do, and then without further ado, hand over to JF, is not talk about the new galleries. I'd take up the whole hour plus, but just give you a sense. I hope some of you or all of you know what they looked like before we closed. And just to give you a sense of what they will look like now, the Assyrian court, not entirely changed, but we will reposition it narratively, and that will be made possible by the addition of all this label railing around it. And then you're looking through at the first other gallery, which is tentatively titled Clay and Creation, about the importance of clay in the landscape, the mental and physical landscape of the ancient Near East. This is what some of you who knew the galleries, know the galleries, that sort of area, that long strip of all jetties that was all beige. This is the same space. So we're really trying to bring the colors of the ancient world, the ancient Near East back, the lapis and gold that we know clad temples. This is a rupture in our space. That is the story of Hassanlu in Iran, and it has a fascinating story, both of its living culture and its rather dramatic demise, which is signaled here by the burnt, charred wood. The architects that we've worked with, Nada, the principal of whom is Nader Tehrani, have done a really amazing job in working with us. It was a real sort of intellectual thought partnership, and they have realized in architecture so many of our narratives that will then be added to with obviously text and labels and the curation of it. This is the Babylon space that's now opened up like the street, the processional way. The other line is where you all are. The very end of the gallery, the late periods, which pass off on the other side, again, our position to Islamic. This is a space that's new to us because we've swapped one of, for those of you who knew, the top of our J floor plan, which was never very conducive to understanding the space. That will now become part of Cypriot, and we are taking over that first space off the elevator between Islamic and us. And it will be a completely different kind of space that talks about the collecting histories of the ancient Near East and the reception histories and later traditions, which nicely and neatly now passes off to the actual 19th century galleries beyond. And so with that, I mean, this is the last slide of the collecting histories space, but you'll see there's a lot of color, the bronzes, you know, the lapis, the colors of the Silk Road. We're trying to really, the patina bronze that you'll see a lot of tonight is all really sort of part of the affect and the immersiveness of the space. So as Heidi said, please all come see towards the end of 2026. But these are all hot off the press, latest renders, so, and we're done. Pencils went down a couple weeks ago, so it won't change too much from what you see. And with that, that is the context in which this head that you're going to hear a lot about now has been able to be researched, studied, traveled with JF, without JF. It's just become a rock star. It's been all around the world the last few years. So with that, JF, please.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you to everyone here who's been so helpful in setting this up and for inviting us. I would say at the beginning, I am a stutterer, and that's why I went into conservation, because I thought I could just work by myself with an object and not have to talk, but things don't always work out the way you plan. But I just, you know, if I do stutter, it's not you, it's me. So I will start with the first slide, and this talk I'm giving this evening is based on a talk I gave this past summer in Zurich where the CT scan was actually done, and I just wanted to show the slide to give credit to the co-authors and also the scientists who helped to do the scan in Zurich, who will appear on this slide. Now, you know, when I think about how an object like this was made and put myself into the context of more than 4,000 years ago, how could people make a work of art without all the resources that we have today? So how would they turn this lump of copper ore into this marvelous work of art that we have in the collection now? And I kind of think that the artisans must have been magicians. And of course, I'm joking here a bit, but in a way, it's kind of true. I mean, they were combining both artistic skill with scientific experimentation. They were trying to learn how to alter the raw materials they had at their disposal into something that could become permanent. Sometimes they were trying to evoke more precious materials by using things like glazes. With metals, they were trying to create something that would be permanent and last over time. And of course, so much has disappeared, but we do have the head, which weighs quite a lot, actually. So there's a lot of metal there. But this phrase that comes from the work of Zeynep Bahani, who is the professor of ancient Near Eastern art at Columbia University, I think really encapsulates exactly what this work of art and so many of the other works of art in the collection are about. Because, you know, the artisans at that time really were alchemists. They were experimenting with materials, figuring out how they could use them in order to create that philosopher's stone, the kind of the wonderful work of art that we have now. And also these works of art weren't merely depictions, they were actual entities in their own right that had their own agency, at least as far as they believed. And the secret to their alchemy was the control of energy, control of the use of fire. So, you know, I put a lot of words on my slide because I'm so nervous that I won't be able to speak, that at least you'll have something to read. But, you know, fire, control of fire is really at the basis of so much of the artworks in the museum's collection. And recently, Yale formed this pyrotechnology subgroup to kind of trace how fire was used in different cultures around the world. And that's something that, we hope to kind of bring out a little bit in the new galleries as well. I found this picture on the internet, which I thought was wonderful. I've never seen so many angry men working in a workshop, but it does evoke, the kind of, that they were using. I think it's kind of interesting here that, just trying to imagine what it would have been like to create a workshop in ancient times. And of course, fire was used in so many ways, not to smelt the copper ore, to melt the metal, to turn the clay into ceramic, either for the crucibles when they were melting the copper, or to, different types of clays were used, very fine silty clays were used to make the molds for the casting process, so that all the details of the wax model would be preserved. And of course, even just to model the wax, I'm sure they were using heated tools and that kind of thing. And also I was interested too, because I took my children up to Van Cortlandt Manor a number of years ago, and in the kitchen, the women reenactors were wearing all wool, even though it was a very hot day. And they were explaining it's because wool will burn, but it won't catch fire. So I imagine that these sheepskin might also have been protecting the workers they might have been wearing something like this in ancient times. And lost wax casting has a very long history in the Near East, going back into the 5th millennium BC. But most of the early castings were solid casts. And you had a problem if you were trying to do anything more than a small figure, because mostly they were using pure copper, and that absorbs oxygen it absorbs a lot of oxygen when it gets heated, and when you try to pour that into a mold, it becomes very sluggish. And if you're trying to cast anything large with pure copper, you have issues shorting. There might not be enough metal in the casting. If you could get differential shrinkage between the copper that's starting to solidify in the mold walls and the copper within the center of the casting, which is still molten, so that you really couldn't cast anything that was that large solid with the materials they were using at the time. And so if they wanted to make something large, they tended to use copper sheeting. And this is a wonderful kind of lintel frieze that's now at the British Museum that consists of beaten copper sheet over bitumen-covered wood, and they covered the wood with bitumen so that it gave kind of more form to the more support to the three-dimensional shapes that they were creating here. And it's quite a wonderful, very, it has a lot of power, but it doesn't really capture details, naturalistic details, the way you could get with lost wax casting. And this is, I think, what I was already mentioning before, the difficulties of casting with copper, which is what they were using in the third millennium BC. Tin didn't get added until later in the 2nd millennium, and also lead, which helps with the flow of metal through the mold, wasn't known at the earlier periods. So this is just a general description of lost wax casting, which probably many of you already know. But in lost wax casting over a core, I'm sorry, I meant to say hollow core lost wax casting, you make a shape out of clay, which is approximately the shape of the final casting that you would like to create. Then you cover that clay form with wax, and you model that. You put all the designs that you want to in that wax. And then you have to stick these metal, what they call core supports or chaplets, through the wax into the clay in the center. And then you can invest all that with another coating of clay, which will serve as the mold. Then when you heat that mold and you make sure that there's a hole inside that will access where your wax model is, the wax will pour out. And that area where the wax was is where you will pour the metal during casting. And those core supports will hold that core in place after the wax is gone, because or else it would just fall against the mold wall. I hope that was clear, but you know, and I think this diagram does a good job. And in later periods, even very small objects, and this is a foundation peg in our collection from Tel Mozan, a site in northern Syria, and it shows how with the core in place, when you pour the metal in, it'll shoot around that core and will fill the mold very fast. And I think one reason why they added a core to this piece, even though it's quite small, is that it has these projecting arms of the lion. And you wanted to make sure that those projecting arms got cast before the metal started to cool and solidify in the mold. In this case, that the flat sheet is a separate piece that was stuck into a recess that was made in the front of the lion. But you can see how, you know, imagine even if you have a pail of water, if you put a big rock in there, you'll fill the pail a lot faster. It's quite simple, but it was something that, you know, took a little while for people to realize how to do that. And this is a really wonderful model of the casting of an aqua manile, a medieval water container that was made for an exhibition that was held at the Bard Graduate Center a number of years ago. And in the center, you can see, you know, it's a lion-shaped aqua manile. And in the center two images, you can see one, after you make your form in wax, you would then attach tubes of wax. And those tubes will either supply metal to the different parts of the mold, and those are the red tubes here attached to that model. And then other ones will allow air and gases to escape as you're pouring the metal in. And those are the blue tubes in this on the left here. And then that all gets covered in this layer of clay that will form your mold for the casting. And here it's been cut away so you can see the inside. And then you can see at the end, after casting, when they break away the mold, you have quite a lot of work left, because you have to cut off all those tubes that were connected to the casting. And you also have to cut the ends of the core supports that kind of projected out into the clay. So there was quite a lot of work to do afterwards. And that's one reason why I think they were using copper in the early periods, because copper's a lot softer than, for instance, bronze. So and before they had bronze tools and everything, copper was probably a lot easier to cut away, and also then to abrade down and to smooth the surface for the final finishing. So this piece in our collection, this piece that was on view in our collection for many years, it's actually a vessel stand. It's an ibex, and then the structure that comes up from the back of the ibex has rings. You can't see it in this image, but it has rings, and people could put vessels in. It was probably used in a sacred environment. But the ibex, which is a separate part of this stand, has a core inside. And a number of years ago, a former colleague radiographed it, and he noted that he wondered if this was the earliest casting that existed has a core. And actually, I went through, there was a very rather comprehensive catalog of bronze castings from the ancient Near East that's been published since that point. And I do indeed think that this is the earliest example of a bronze casting with a core that we know. Now, there have been some people in Egyptology who believe that they were the first, but I don't think that's true. Because this really does predate any examples I've seen from Egypt. And so in this radiograph that's on the right, I've kind of shaded where the core is in this kind of pink color. And then the arrows point to the two core supports that held the core in place. And one thing that was very typical, and I mentioned before the difficulty of casting copper, is that it was very difficult for them not to have casting flaws. And it's interesting how, and I don't have pictures of that in this set, but it's interesting how bad some of the castings were, and yet they made the effort to somehow fix them, rather than throwing it all back into the crucible and melting it again. And I think part of the problem is that just getting to that point used so many materials, all the fuel that it took to melt the copper, all those resources, the clay to make the mold, all that was lost, would have been lost if you just threw away the casting that you got, even if it wasn't perfect. And in this case, I've circled the head, which ended up being kind of, and I'm not sure if this head, if they intended it to be cast in one piece, but it didn't end up being that way. The head, you can see there's these dark areas which are air bubbles, porosity, and there's a separate piece now with a rivet in it, and it's a very complicated arrangement. I mean, it looks like a beautiful piece if you see the object, but definitely they did have challenges in making it. And then in 1992, the museum, the Metropolitan, hosted an exhibition from the Louvre, the Royal City of Susa, and our head, which you saw before, was in that exhibition. And prior to then, I had noticed that there was a hole underneath the chin that had been filled with pigmented wax. And I took the wax out, and I could see that there was a large, a hollow inside the head. And that was kind of surprising because for a number of years on the label, it was written that it was cast solid or with a very small core. And I think one of the reasons is that the piece is incredibly heavy for its size. It's about 45 pounds or so. And the radiograph we had taken many years before in the department indicated that this is the radiograph, that you can see that kind of darker area that goes up the center. That's because there's, there are more X-rays reaching the film than the lighter areas on either side. And of course, X-ray film, sometimes you think about them as like a photograph, but instead they're more kind of a recording of densities. And so on the right here, I just show like how if you have a number of different shaped objects, with the radiograph, they kind of superimpose on each other, and it's very hard to tell them apart. But on the lower right, you see these two slices. If you sliced the image, you could then see what the different shapes are because you've separated them out. It's a more three-dimensional process. So about that time, a conservator at the Cincinnati Art Museum had been bringing some of their Asian bronzes to a General Electric jet engine facility nearby to investigate them. And I just happened to find this image on the left here. It looks like a Sasanian period stucco in a CAT scan, which I thought was kind of fun. This is the jet engine facility in Cincinnati that we took the head to. And for human CAT scans, the X-ray source and the detector go around you in a circle. But for industrial ones, the piece goes around. I don't think we'd like that if we went to the hospital and we were spun around. But the piece goes around. So here you see on the left, that's where the X-ray source is. And then that kind of yellow thing with the black horizontal line, that's where the detector is. Now at that point, it was kind of expensive, and also storage was a problem, so we could only do individual slices of the head to get an idea of what was going And these were kind of two of the slices that we took at that time. As you can see, because of there was a lot of scattering and attenuation of the X-rays, the slices weren't very clear, and they were kind of hard to read. But one thing that was really clear, that was kind of exciting, is that in the image on the left, in the upper corner, you can see this long, straight, white object, and that is a core pin. So that was the first evidence that we had that this was a holocast object, holocast casting with core pins. And that's where this problem, I mean, this is where this project ended until very recently. In 2022, Melissa Eppenheimer, who's now at the University of Pittsburgh and was a former fellow in the Ancient Near East Department, published an article in the Metropolitan Museum Journal in which he re-examined the attribution of the head, because for many years, and I'm sorry I didn't mention this before, but for many years there was an argument about whether or not it was from Iran or from Mesopotamia, exactly what date it should be placed in. And Melissa did a very thorough investigation of how it came to be that it was attributed to Iran. And she found that there really wasn't a very good base for it, that it was largely due to Arthur Upton Pope, who had a predilection for Iran. That was really where his main interest was. And before this, at that time, and you know, this object came to this country in the early 20th century. At that time, there were very few known examples of technically proficient metal casting from Mesopotamia. So there really wasn't much incentive for him to place it in that sphere. And you know, I'm not the art historian. I'm sure Kim could make a much better explanation here. But another important piece of evidence, though, that Melissa brought up is the fact that the headdress on our copperhead is very close in style to a stone fragment from the site of Tello in southern Iraq. So, and also dated around the late 3rd millennium BC. So this was very interesting for two reasons. One is that it kind of placed our head in the late 3rd millennium, at a very time when there have been really two other wonderful bronze castings, which I will show in a second. It also allowed us a little bit more latitude in sending the head around the world, because there has been an injunction against sending Iranian pieces because of the political situation with Iran. So the fact that we could say that our head was produced in ancient Iraq kind of cleared a number of hurdles up for us. I'm sorry. So these are the two other pieces dated to the Akkadian period in the late 3rd millennium BC. The figure on the right, which was unearthed by accident in 1974, is part of a figure, and I show a cylinder seal impression next to it to give you an idea of what the figure was intended. It was a kind of a standard anapotropaic figure holding a standard that might have been placed towards an entrance to an important precinct in ancient times. It's slightly smaller than life size, but it's quite impressive. It's the largest, I think, bronze object found in ancient Iraq. It weighs, I think, 150 kilos. It's really quite large and quite impressive. I mean, this is, again, late 3rd millennium. It's beautifully modeled. And then on the right is the so-called Sargon head that was found at Nineveh in 1931. And this is just a wonderful, incredible work of casting. Also condition. I think it was thrown in a well where it might have been in anaerobic conditions. It wasn't exposed to oxygen, so it doesn't have the green oxide crust that you see our head. So you see, Pope never saw these pieces when he was giving it a Persian, our head of Persian provenance. And I think this kind of changes things a bit. And the fascinating thing about the Sargon head is, as you may have noticed in the previous image and also here, that the eyes were gouged out. The ears on both sides were hacked off, and the bottom of the beards were cut off. And this goes to the point of the fact, and I was alluding before, that these figures had agency. They were really, they were thought to be able to see, to hear, that people could petition to them, that they were living. And it is thought that the kind of attack on this head occurred when Ashurbanipal's palace at Nineveh was sacked by a coalition of the Babylonians and the Persians. And so, it's just kind of a very, very strong evocation of just how powerful these sculptures were. And a very interesting facet of the Sargon head. So yes, so this is just saying that our head is now kind of conjoined this triad of very wonderful castings from that period. And similar to the Sargon head, our head has a tang under the neck, so it was meant to be placed on a body, perhaps of another material. On the Sargon head, the tang has been broken off. And then a very interesting thing about the Sargon head came to Germany in the late 70s, and it was in an exhibition there at that time. And at that point, Joseph Rieder I'm not going to be able to say it, Kim will be able to pronounce it, so I'm not even going to try, but it is at their well, yes, he was associated with the Pergamon Museum and the Metal Institute nearby, that he got to examine the head. And on the left, you can see a radiograph that he did at the time. And what he found, at least what he said, was that the two ears were cast first and then attached by a plate. And that's that kind of whitish area you see in the center of the head that spans the two ears. And I believe that the reason they did that, again, is because they were concerned about casting flaws. And this statue had to have ears. He had to be able to hear. And if the things that projected out from the head were the things that would get the metal at the last. So you wanted to make sure that any projections got metal, and this might have been a way to do that. The other possibility, though, because I've never seen this piece up close, is that maybe the ears didn't cast in the original casting and they had to fix that. I don't know, but it is a very interesting aspect of that head. And you can see that the X-ray of their head and then our head look quite a bit different. And I will point out here that their head looks more like what you'd expect with the hollow core, that the density goes around the edges and that the center is less radiopaque, it's darker, because the clay core kind of followed the outer contours of the head. And then here's just pointing out to that, that metal plate spanning the head, and then the green circle is just pointing out that the core supports seem to be these paired core supports, almost like a U-pin that's like staples that are going in from different places. Well, the reattribution that Melissa Eppenhaber gave us and also the closing of the galleries gave us an impetus to then further investigate the head, and kindly with Kim's support and the support of the Ancient Near East department, we were able to take it to a CT scanning facility in Zurich. And the reason why we ended up there is that the Alexander Fleisch at the center here had been involved with a University of Bologna group who had done some scanning at the Getty Museum. And I had contacted other labs in the United States, including the one I'd been to before, but they all said, well, you bring it on over and we'll try and see. And the thing is, we can't do that with a museum object. We need assurance that it'll get done and that they have the security protocols in place. And they have worked with museums and natural history collections. So I knew that they could get the work done. So this is the setup. And so in the image on the left, the LINAC, that's an accelerator that kind of amps up the X-ray source. And in the table on the left, you can see all the parameters. At the museum, we have an X-ray, an industrial X-ray that goes up to 320,000 volts. This X-ray unit goes up to 6 million volts. So it's very high power. So the X-ray goes from the left, and then you can see the detector, this row of aluminum, this kind of linear aluminum shape with the black ports, and that's where the detector is for the radiographs. And then the head was then mounted where that rotating stage is with the shaft, and then they slowly, over a week's time, went the full height of the head. So this is the head. This is very slow, very glacial process, but the head was slowly turning, and then slices were recorded at what was it? The slice distance was 0.5 millimeter. So it's very high definition you get. So this is a video that was made of the process afterwards. And the yellow area here is the hollow that's now in the center of the head. And that represents where the core is. I'm sorry, here, yeah, maybe I should. Well, here, the kind of gray area is where the wax and then the metal is. And I might go back. Well, I don't know if it's going to go. Yeah. And then the blue there is all the porosity. In other words, all the trapped oxygen. And as I said before, copper really, sucks in oxygen when it's hot, and then when it cools, it lets it all out and it forms these bubbles. So we're very lucky that it actually didn't affect the surface of the cast. So this is, again, an image of the hollow, which kind of represents what the core looked like. And I've never seen like this done before, where you can actually see the core. And then you see these little holes in it. That's where the core supports. And then this dark blue is where there's actually core still remaining, we believe, on the front of the face. So I'll maybe go to the next slide. So here is, again, the gray overlay is where the wax was, and then that got replaced by the metal. The yellow is where the hollow is, and that represents what the shape of the core was. And on the left here, I've kind of stripped those other kind of protuberances were kind of trapped gas, because they really didn't know. They really weren't aware of how much they needed to vent the mold at this point. So they trapped a lot of gas. And as I mentioned, the copper also absorbed a lot of gas. So on the left, I kind of have removed some of that to kind of clean it down to show you what the core would have actually looked like. And to me, it looks like a Brancusi head. But you can see how there are very few details in that core. It's a very small core compared to, for instance, the one for the Sargon head. And on the right here, you're just pointing out that the front of the face, the casting was very, very thick. And that's where the majority of the weight is, on the front of the head. And it's very thin at the back. So this is a vertical slice through the center. And you can see at the back, there's some holes there, there's some porosities. It's quite thin, but the front is quite thick. And then looking at this again, this is the void, the shape of the void, and you can see that there's kind of this edge that goes around there. And on the right, it's a view of the head sliced open, looking towards the back. And there's kind of a puddle of metal there in the center, and I've highlighted here. And what that is there seems to have been an additional pore of metal inside the head. And this explained a feature that we'd always wondered about, that you can see on the outside, that there's this very rough area at the back of the head. And I don't know if you noticed in the Sargon head, there was a bun, because it was very typical for royal figures. They had they collected their hair at the back of the head, and they had a bun And it was wondered if this was kind of a damaged area where a bun had been attached and broken off. But what it looks as if that the casting just simply didn't close at the back of the head in the initial casting, and they had to go back and pour more metal in. And it just ended up being very rough back there. And this is also, if you slice the head open at the top, on the right, you can see again that puddle of metal going down towards the bottom. And that included the tang on the bottom of the neck. And, you know, there are other casting flaws. I mentioned the large holes underneath the chin. The beard, a section of the beard is missing. And this is, you know, very curious how they dealt with that missing section. We have no evidence. There's no sign that they cast anything on there in ancient times, although it's possible something was cast on there and it fell off. Or maybe they filled it with another material. We just don't know. And in the older CAT scans, I was really intrigued by these slices through the ears, because I thought, well, maybe our ears, like the Sargon ears, were made separately, because I saw porosity around both of them. But I found with this new CT scan that wasn't the case. They were cast at the same time with the head, but one of the ears almost didn't cast because there was a huge porosity that actually there's a hole that goes out the back of the ear. So they were really, and there's also a metal patch that I discovered that's within the thick corrosion crust in the forehead. So it's really interesting about this head because they were taking a lot of risks. The Sargon head really seemed to have been done by someone who knew what they were doing. They kind of were trying to reduce the amount of metal needed because, you know, the issue I mentioned before about cracking, about shorting, not having enough metal to fill the mold, about not casting parts that stick out. It's as if the sculptor who did this or the workmen who did this really weren't aware of these issues and weren't concerned about them, and they were investing a lot of material into something that almost didn't work. And in some ways it didn't work because the beard didn't cast completely. And so it's hard for us to know, and you know, Dr. Eppenheimer was hoping that maybe we'd find some chronological reason to think that one came before the other. You know, just based on two, you know, objects, I don't think we can do that. But it did appear to me that maybe the creator of the Sargon head was more used to sculpting in solid materials rather than casting in metal. And I think it just goes to show that in this early period, there was no standard way of doing anything. And it'd be really wonderful if we could also CT scan the two other pieces we saw before. Maybe we'd find out more. But I do think that, you know, it's again, as I said, regardless of any flaws they had, it was just an amazing achievement, and we're very lucky to have the head still with us now. But so thank you, and I'm going to pass back to Jim.
JF, amazing. I mean, I've heard this, we've talked individually, and I've heard this lecture of JF's several times now, but it's so fascinating. And of course, you know, it's all about technology, but it's technology that is more recent that's allowing us to learn more and more. And JF, thank you for doing all that work and traveling the world. And I'm just, as I said, I'm the closer here. JF, this is a slide that you've sort of seen a version of when I showed you this part of the new galleries, and this is where that head will be in the new galleries, as well as on the wall, as JF is pointing, will be a lot of the research that has gone into it, thanks to JF and others recently. So that's exciting. And just to sort of give you a sense of, you know, JF talked about Melissa Eppenheimer's work and his work, and how the head of a ruler has been attributed to Iran and then Mesopotamia and Iran. So even as recently as 2001, it was supposed to have happened in 2020, but we all know what happened that year. The head was requested for a show at the V&A, the Epic Iran show. It ended up not going because of their postponing due to 2020, and it had also been promised at the same time, essentially, to the Getty for their Mesopotamia show. So even as recently as 2021, both cultures were requesting the head. And JF, goes to all these things with that. They're like attached at the hip. And then the next thing that happened, again, because of the closure of our galleries, we have a very large loan at the National Museum of Korea that is still ongoing, that opened in July of 2022, right? Yes, JF went there too. And it will remain on view, that exhibition titled Mesopotamia, until September of this year. The loan was extended. However, the head got specially picked up recently in January, the only thing taken out of the Korea show, to go to the Louvre, which just opened a few weeks ago, and that is a sort of a collaboration we have with them, and it's 10 objects. That one of which, of course, is this wonderful head. And here, it's hard to see, but reunited, or united for the first time with that fragment from Tello that JF showed you. And that, we had made that promise before the the National Museum of Korea asked for the extension. So that's why the head got picked up and went there. And it's a really wonderful little collaboration. Our 10 objects are scattered all through the Louvre galleries of the Antiquity Orientale, which are vast, football field after football field galleries. And they're in dialogue with objects from their collection in a really interesting way. And they're easy to find. They're all branded Met Red. So if you happen to be in Paris anytime between now and the fall of 2025, please take a look. It's quite fun, and then you'll get to see the head, because you won't see it in New York until 2026. And it's like a superstar over there. It's everywhere you go. Like the head is in the pyramid, the head is in the hallway. It's all over Paris. So it's really turned into this sort of rock star of an object. And even though it's at the Louvre right now for a year and a half, if you happen to be in Seoul, Korea, do take a minute to go to the National Museum and see the rest of the exhibition without the head. And I think that's it. I thank you. I thank you, JF, and your wonderful audience. And then someone else takes over for Q&A.
Oh, I want to thank you both so much. You both want to stand up at the podium? So thank you. Well, that is one much traveled head.
Frequent flyer mile.
Yes, exactly. And how thrilled that original artisan would have been to know that we are discussing this, 4,500 years later, would that be, isn't it? Almost five. Incredible, incredible. I also will say a few more words at the end, but now we'd love to take some questions if we have any from our audience.
Sorry, thank you very much. That was incredible. For both of you, it was really informative. I may have missed it, but how did the head come into the possession of the museum? And also, has Iraq asked for it back?
You're going to make me do this, yeah. Here, I can go back here. It came in through the Brummer collection. So in what was that, 49?
It was earlier.
Earlier than that, actually earlier than that. Iraq has not asked for it back. But we're very, we have a very nice relationship with the Iraqis, and we discuss objects all the time along those lines. So, yeah, we have a very open line of discussion and dialogue with them.
Just so you could have a mic, so you don't have to both have to go up there. Any more questions? Now, I know this is a question from a blacksmith, so I think it'll be very informed.
So I do have some experience in non-ferrous metals castings. What were the cores made out of, and how did they get the core out of that head?
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't explain that very well, because it's true that with the Sargon head, before they put the neck plate across that had the tang coming out, they took the core out. With our head, what it appears to me, and I should have mentioned that too, that it looks like when they had the casting flaw that the back of the neck had, that they went back and they chopped most of the core out, but it looks like some was left still adhered on the back of the front. And I do have a glass container at my desk. I haven't done anything with it yet, but it contains pieces that might be some of the original core. And it's a very sandy, concreted material. It's somewhat friable. I'm not quite sure if it's actually core or just, dirt or sand that got in there over the millennia.
Well, if they didn't have maybe that fault that they had to do the second pour, maybe that was their only way to get the core out. Maybe it was not unintentional.
What, to get the core out?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it might also, like the Sargon head, the plate might have been a secondary cast. The whole idea was to get that core out. The difference with the Sargon head, though, is that the eyes are open to the core area. Ours, it's so thick that actually the eye sockets are within the depth of the metal. I don't know if that made any difference in terms of, because obviously with both cases, the eyes were inlaid with some other material.
That's what I was wondering, if the eyes, actually, if you had evidence that the eyes were inlay or glass or...
There's no evidence on this one. Actually, I did a mock-up once and it kind of scared me. So I didn't put it in there. It's actually nicer without eyes. But we did acquire from the Albright Knox a few years ago a wonderful, very small figure from Iran, I think it's supposedly. And that within the copper corrosion, there is a shell inlay in one of the eyes. And probably they use with this piece, probably something like shell with lapis or some dark stone inlay for the pupil.
Right, I also want to encourage our online audience to submit questions.
How do you get that around the world? And how do you guard it? I wouldn't let it out of my sight.
He doesn't let it out of his sight.
Well, the scariest thing actually with this is both cases, both in Cincinnati and the other one, I had to lift it and then climb up on a stage. There were all these wires going around, and climb up on a stage and then lower it down into the mount. That was kind of the scariest thing, I would say, because it's quite heavy. It's quite a lot of copper. The nice thing about when it is in the CT scanning facility is under, so high, it's all locked. It's under high X-ray exposure. No one's going to go in there, and if they did, they wouldn't last. We have a wonderful packing department in the museum that just makes these amazing crates. And this one, I guess they've reused that crate over and over. So, it's all, we're kind of spoiled, I think, in that way.
Yeah, and I would just say that, there's a really well-honed system of shipping around the world. Every museum, all the art, any exhibition you've ever seen, the indemnities and, the way it's done it's really, pretty much any flight you've ever been on might have had either artwork or horses or, the cargo in planes is extraordinary, but, there's a lot of security. There are brokers, custom brokers, always a courier, and if there are many objects, more than one courier. So there's always someone, a conservator, sometimes a mount maker. It's a very elaborate, it's probably the biggest line item expense of an exhibition or whatever. But, sure, could something happen? It could, but knock on. So far, we're doing okay.
What is your best guess for how long it took the artist to make this? Who commissioned the artist? And how many rough drafts did this artist do until it got to the right specimen?
Those are all wonderful questions, but I don't know if we can really answer them. As I kind of was indicating at the end, I really wonder if this was an artist, and that's why I had because there was a fragment of a stone head also excavated from Tello that had some, sense, I think that, I have a feeling that this artist was used to working in a solid material rather than making, because, a hollow cast is like a bell. If you use it so that the core is large and you reduce the amount of metal used. But this person who made this seemed to really want to make the eye orbits completely in the wax. I think that they were someone working with wax, but I don't think it, I guess it depends on how fast they were, but I don't really know if there's an answer for that. And in terms of the commission, I guess that's an issue that I would throw over to Kim.
I mean, again, the one thing about the ancient world and, up until very recently, and even then there are gaps, is we don't have captions, we don't have journals always, so there's very little we know for sure. But generally, if it was this amount of a precious metal material, like, copper, bronze, it would have been commissioned by a palace, a temple. Craftsmen, there was no real sense of an artist the way we think, sort of post-17th, 18th century Kant, like an artist who is an artist for artist's sake. They were usually almost more like ritual technicians. They were in the service of making enlivening sculptures for ritual purposes or ideological purposes. So probably again, I can't tell you that for sure, but my guess is that it would have been commissioned by, a bigger, larger entity and for a very specific purpose. Right, Karen? Do you agree?
Okay. Do you have any idea where,
There
in the
you
back.
are. Hi.
Do you have any idea through either its, if there's any wear use on the flange at the bottom, or for where it would be mounted to, or in what context it'd be mounted?
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing is, there is a fairly thick corrosion crust, and I don't know if I'm not going to bring it back now, but there is an area on the bottom of the beard where you can see that corrosion crust is removed down to a cuprite, like it's a brick red. And it was very common in the past for objects to be cleaned, that they would remove the corrosion down to a compact layer. Fortunately, it looks like someone started to do that here and stopped, because that quite often kind of damages the surface and removes a lot of detail. But this being said, it's really hard to see on the pin any wear, but the pin actually was broken because there is a transversal drill hole, probably for a pin to secure it. So that kind of suggests that whatever they stuck it on was hollow inside, so they could get up to put the pin through. And it's broken off at that point, because I guess drilling that hole made it weaker there. So at some point, it was kind of really yanked off whatever, mount or body it was on.
I was wondering which aspects of the head make it feel like portraiture to you? Is there any difference between the Sargon head and this?
Well, I do think that our head does look much more like a portrait, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to pull it up now, but the detail, which I didn't really even concentrate on until recently, but even though it has a fairly thick corrosion crust, the underneath of the eyes have these kind of like fleshy folds, which I'm starting to get as well. So, but it reminds me of like those images of Senwaz Senwasret, I can't say it, the Senwasret in Egypt, where, suddenly it's acceptable or even desirable for the ruler to look like someone who has cares, or as a, I guess it shows their kind of experience in life. So this piece does, and over the years, people have, looked at all the features and noted all these kind of ethnic features to say either it was Iranian or Mesopotamian, which seems a bit awkward now, but, but I do feel that our...
Fleshy nose, too.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's one thing too. I thought maybe there was something about the nose, but this, like there was a cast on piece, but the scan shows that everything was cast at one time.
I mean, it's definitely less than the normal, like, idealized human face. It's interesting, and like the floppy ears, whether that's a casting.
Well, that's so he could hear.
Yeah, exactly, but I mean, it's very expressive.
Right, yeah.
It's more naturalistic than many. Thank you. But why?
Do we have any more in-person questions? Because I have oh, there is someone over here, and then I have an online question, and then we will wrap it up. Okay.
Sorry to make you repeat yourself, but I was wondering if, I know you don't exactly know, but I was wondering if you could take a guess on like which ruler it would be that they were taking a portrait on, or like I don't know if you said if you knew exactly the civilization, and if at that, I know you mentioned that the last casting, the Sargon, it had ears, so if like people were in the same space, it gave the aesthetic that it was listening to you. So out of your opinion, was it more a religious thing, or was it just like someone put it in their home to like, oh, I'm the king?
Well, it's kind of hard to separate religion in the ancient world, right, from the secular, because the rulers were sacred themselves. So, I grew up going to Catholic church. So this kind of fits in with my, understanding growing up, that the sculptures in the church are something that you pray to or could talk to.
I mean, I don't think anyone could say that we could assign an identity to that piece. And the Sargon head is, if you'll notice, in quotes. I don't think there's any.
Yeah, I think it's from that period.
Period.
And he was the well-known ruler. He was famous for centuries afterwards.
Yeah.
So everything, right, so the statue came from that period, but
Yeah.
not necessarily him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say both are elite personages of some sort, whether, and their turbans or definitely give them a status. And, I guess a lot of it has to do with where they would have been set up, erected, and that is, one of the shortcomings of, I mean, even, Sargon, that head was found in a sort of construction site, if I recall.
Well, I think it was thrown down a well.
It was down to a well, yeah. So out of context, even in antiquity, and we don't know. We don't know. Wish we did. I mean, sorry, just unlike, but we do sometimes, like Gudea statuary is inscribed, is named, or Ningirsu, even Ushumgal and Shari Giziapsu, they're ones that are named, and that's wonderful when it happens, but anyway.
When did bronze casting replace copper?
Well, I mean, tin did not, obviously Mesopotamia didn't have metals. It was resource poor in that regard. So the metal would have to have come from an outside area. And we don't really know where the copper that was used to create this head came from, potentially from Oman or from mountainous regions to the north. And the tin also was brought from outside. And even, there's been a lot of work over the years trying to identify tin sources. And I believe that the latest thought, it came from areas to the east of Mesopotamia. And tin bronzes, you do find tin alloyed with copper sometimes in early periods, but it didn't really become commonly used to create bronze alloys until later in the 2nd millennium BC. And at that time too, then lead started to be added to the alloys, because lead helps to deal with the oxygen absorption question and helps the metal to kind of enter the mold more easily. But yeah.
Anything you want to add? No. Okay. No. Anyway, thank you both so much, really. Thank you. Before thanking you, again, I want to express my thanks to AIA-NY, in particular Heidi and other members of the organization who are here this evening. So thank you so much for suggesting this really, really wonderful topic. JF, you were a complicated subject that you made so comprehensive and easy to understand. So thank you so much. And it was just fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also thinking that that artisan was probably, or artist, or whatever the term you used to describe him, he was also probably, I mean, he was using cutting edge technology at that time too. So here we are, 5,000 years later, exploring again what he made. So anyway, thank you so much. Thank you very much. And Kim, I can hit well, that would be so not the case, but thank you for giving us, in addition to the beginning and conclusion of the talk, a preview of what we can all see in 2026, and it really looks fantastic. So thank you very much. And I just want to say that we are just so delighted to have both of you here this evening. So thank you very much. And just to say a few words as Victoria Dengel, our Executive Director.
So as our audience always knows, Karen leaves me with very little nouns and adjectives, but Kim, thank you so much. We're so delighted to have you here. I love the passion between the two of you. I was picturing you in the office talking, and and how exciting. You referred to something about chronology and staff meetings. Well, I have to say that you're probably the two most fascinating people at the staff meetings. So, and JF, I can't imagine, this head of a ruler, AKA rock star, could not have a better person to travel with. So, thank you.
He doesn't talk.
He doesn't talk. But you make everybody excited to think about him, so thank you so much. That was really delightful, so thank you.
So thank you. So finally, we would like to make a little presentation to you both. I don't know if you share an office, or if it's, no, because you're in the conservation point, but anyway, well, a poster each as a little memento. And this is like what you do for us. Oh. I gotta start doing things. No. So just so you will remember us, and again, to share our pleasure in having you here this evening. No, you're so welcome. I hope you will all join us in person for a glass of wine. To our online audience, thank you so much. Just to remind you all that we have another special lecture coming up, the restoration of the Notre Dame spire, which will be next Tuesday, and I hope many of you will be able to return for that. Finally, thank you both so much. Thank you.